Hey there, Zach Henderson here, and in today's video, we're going to be exploring one of my favorite single leg exercises that really works the glutes and hamstrings, not to mention improves hip stability and balance, and that is the mighty single leg deadlift. The single leg deadlift, or SLDL for short, is a hip hinge exercise, which means the goal is to flex at the hips, push the butt back, and then with glute engagement, stand back up to neutral. It's in the same family as the traditional deadlift, the kettlebell swing, and the hip thrust. And with all these exercises, the goal is to fulcrum the torso around hip flexion and hip extension, not simply to bend through the spine or to excessively lunge or squat with knee bend. As the name suggests, you will be performing a hip hinge pattern on one leg, while the floating leg stays in hip extension. In other words, just keeping the floating leg strong, straight, and more or less in line with the spine. When using weight, the single leg deadlift can be performed in two general ways. First is the Romanian or RDL variation, where the weight stays floating through the entire set. And then the other variation is the traditional deadlift approach, where the weight is returned to the ground in between every single rep. Each version has unique benefits. The RDL keeps the muscles under more constant tension, which is typically better for building endurance and maybe muscle hypertrophy. And the deadlift from the floor version is typically better for raw strength, building that off the floor strength, and generally can be loaded a little bit heavier. I'm pretty adamant about programming single leg work for all of my clients, from competitive powerlifters to newbies in the gym. And because there are so many different options and variations to use with a single leg deadlift, I can oftentimes find an option that is right for just about any type of client. The SLDL really helps to highlight and even correct imbalances and instability in the hips. So even when you're getting stronger at bilateral movements like your traditional squats and deadlifts, you could be exacerbating underlying movement issues. And that's where single leg work comes in. So again, this is super important for any sort of athlete and just really anyone who wants to maximize their strength and their movement quality for general everyday life and daily tasks. So let's get started with our progressions. First, a quick clearing test. Simply stand on one leg and bring the opposite knee as high as you can without leaning back. Really root the foot through the floor, grip the ground with your toes. Don't slouch on your hip, but engage the quads, glutes, and abs and maintain a tall posture. Really think about creating space with the hip. Keep the knee as high as you can, and when you can hold this position and this muscular intention for 10 seconds on each side, you are ready for the single leg deadlift. First up, we have the slider deadlift. And you can do these in socks or use a valve slide, furniture sliders, or even a paper plate. Come up on the tiptoes of the unloaded leg and slide the foot back with stiffened quads. Slowly increase the reach while staying balanced on that front foot. When you feel a good hamstring stretch, or you're getting close to losing your balance, squeeze the glutes and slide the leg forward back into that standing position. Once you're confident with the range of motion, you can slide the foot back, pause, raise it up, and stand. For the next two drills, we're going to use a foam roller to help you find your stability and balance. Stand the roller up vertically next to the floating leg and place the nearest hand on top, using it as a balance aid. Again, push the hips back and drive the back leg strong and straight. As your balance improves, move the roller farther away and apply less and less pressure until you're barely pressing with just one finger. Now we're going to use the roller to help create core stability and linkage between the upper body and lower body. Place one end of the roller on top of the floating foot and palm the other end with the same side arm, keeping both limbs locked, strong, and straight. Start with a little kick forward before sweeping the leg back. Maintain light to moderate pressure through the roller to really engage and challenge the full body linkage. Sweep the leg forward and repeat. And now for our first variation without any assistance. Clasp your hands behind your back, really pull the shoulders down and make a proud chest. Sweep the leg forward and back as before. The second option here is to reach the arms long and forward while keeping the shoulders and hips squared off. You can also do this with hands crossed over your chest or even hands behind your head. By this point, and once you've had some practice with these bodyweight variations, you should have a firm grasp on how to root through the floor with your feet, how to hinge through the hips, and also how to keep your back leg active and straight. So if these variations have not caused you any issue and you can do them for, let's say, 8 to 10 reps at a time without losing balance, then you are ready to start adding some weight. Start by holding a kettlebell or a weight plate at chest height and perform the single leg deadlift as usual. For the sake of safety and stability, I like to reestablish ground contact with the floating foot at the top of each rep. To help really engage the lats, you can move the weight down towards the belly button during the hip hinge, essentially creating an isometric row with the arms and lats. By holding the weight up high around the upper body, you're really learning how to keep the core engaged and torso square, which is really going to come in handy as we start to use heavier weights and with the arm in a lengthened position. So now we'll take a look at the most commonly seen variation, the contralateral single leg RDL. Contralateral simply means that the opposite limbs are loaded. So if you're standing on your left foot, the right arm will be holding the weight. Begin by standing with both feet on the ground. Hold a dumbbell or kettlebell close by the floating leg. As the leg moves back, simply fill the same space with the loaded arm. Hinge back until your hand is somewhere around or just below the knee. Pause for a second and squeeze up. Another variation here to really wind up the hip is to push the weight across the midline towards the standing foot. This doesn't mean to go deeper necessarily, just add a subtle inside turn with the hip and torso. And here's a bonus exercise to really challenge your stability in that hip hinge position. At your deepest range of motion or a bit higher, maintain alignment and balance as you pass the kettlebell from one hand to the other. Keep your breathing deep and even and try 3 to 5 passes each side and stand back up. The next option is the traditional deadlift, where the weight is lifted and returned to the ground between every rep. This one's a bit more challenging because you'll have to establish your single leg balance before lifting the weight. Line up the weight just to the inside of your standing foot so you'll be reaching straight down for it, not out and away. Perform the eccentric portion of the single leg deadlift as usual. Grab the handle and slowly squeeze the weight off the floor. Pause here for a few seconds to really own this bottom position and stay tight. Slowly stand up and at the top, kickstand the leg to find balance and rest momentarily. Keep the lats tight on the negative to really prevent the weight from falling forward. Maintain full body tightness and repeat the rep from a dead stop. One big caveat here, we do not want to sacrifice alignment just to grab the weight. It's a long way to reach, especially if you're tall or using dumbbells. That's why I suggest elevating the weight on a block or plates as much as needed to maintain control and spinal alignment. Of course, the SLDL can be performed with weights in both hands, and even load it up heavy with a barbell or landmine. There are dozens of ways to perform the single leg deadlift, but these progressions will take you far, get you up to speed, and cover most of your training bases. I typically program the single leg deadlift for 2 to 3 sets of 5 to 10 reps each side. When performed slow and control, 10 reps is a lot of time under tension. So don't worry about adding a bunch of weight or reps. Instead, just strive to practice and master the movement pattern. Your single leg deadlift work can be incorporated into your warm-up to prime the nervous system and engage the muscles of the posterior chain. It could also be a main assistance lift after something like squats and deadlifts. Or if you're a little limited on equipment, the single leg deadlift could be your main strength lift of the day, once you really get practiced at all of these other variations. To wrap up, let's look at a few pro tips and common mistakes to avoid. First, try to lift in bare feet or thin-soled shoes as much as possible. A solid ground connection is key for any squat or deadlift, but is especially important when you're only balancing on one foot. Second, when you're using weight, don't settle for a loose grip. Really tighten down on the handle, stiffen up the tricep, and squeeze the lat, pulling the shoulder down. This tension through the arm and upper back will really help you to control the weight and maintain good spinal alignment. The most common mistake I see is the hips turning up and out, essentially turning the rep into a sloppy version of a hip airplane. Really fight to keep the shoulders and hips square to the ground and keep the floating big toe pointing straight towards the ground. This is often combined with what I call tippy hips. Many people think that a balance exercise requires a straight standing leg, but that's certainly not the case, because then you're just teeter-tottering on the hip without using any actual muscular engagement. Remember, it's a hip hinge, so bending the knee allows us to push the hips back while maintaining a midfoot balance. Otherwise, it's just a forward fold hamstring stretch. Finally, please do not bend like a cheap fishing pole during this exercise. Keep the lats and core tight to brace the torso and fight for height on the back heel with glute and quad engagement, not simply arching through the low back. And remember, don't let range of motion sacrifice alignment and muscular engagement. Don't go bending through the spine just to reach the floor or try to go deeper. Everybody has different hip mobility and hip hinge angles, so respect where you're at and train smart. Thank you for watching the video to the end. I hope you picked up something useful, and if you did, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment with your favorite single leg exercise. All the best in your training, and we'll see you in the next video.